So this is actually the first seminar, first AI seminar this year, and we are happy to introduce Andrea Zugarini from the University of Siena, who does research in natural language processing and language models, which should be interesting for many people. So I'll leave it to Eduardo actually to continue with more expanded introduction. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex, and thank you very much, Andrea, for joining us and for accepting to give a talk, a seminar for CitAI. Well, actually, I don't want to take much of your time. I invited Andrea Zugarini to give this particular seminar because I have always been interested in the kind of work that he has been doing, and we met personally last year in October, before obviously the coronavirus thingy, in Siena, in one of our visits to Siena. And he's pretty much working in, as Alex has been saying, in natural language processing models, and in one particular thing that I share a very keen interest on with him, that is in the poetry generation. If you now that you know his name and you know that he's working in the artificial intelligence lab in the University of Siena, you can go through his webpage, and you will see that there are a couple of projects on this particular topic. One of them, I would very much encourage you to go through it, that is Poem Gen, that is about the generation of poetry in the style of Dante and Petrarca, okay? Yeah. So if you like poetry, that's a very interesting, application and very interesting kind of models that they built, and very innovative, because of what he did is to use syllables for tokenization, among other things, with very good results using LSTMs. So other than that, I don't want to take more of your time. Andrea has just told me that he has finished his PhD and is just waiting for his viva. So hopefully he will be a doctor soon, and we'll be able to celebrate soon, face to face at some point. So without further ado, please, Andrea, the floor is yours, and thank you very much again for giving a talk to us.
Thank you, Eduardo, and thank you, Alex, for the introduction. And thank you for inviting me here to the seminar series. So today I'm going to talk about language models for understanding and generation. We have seen in natural language processing astonishing progresses in these last few years, in particular in these last 10 years or so. And we now have models that are at the state of the art, that in some benchmarks in both understanding and generation can reach almost human level performances. And these impressive results have been led by deep learning. And we always give credit to deep learning improvements for these good results. And this, of course, it's true, because that's what brought these amazing results in all the topics, actually in AI. But in the case of NLP, this result could not be happening without the aid of language modeling. So in this seminar, I will show and present you how and why language modeling is so important in NLP, and to build is necessary to build these strong models. So language modeling is the problem of estimating the probability distribution of a text. It has always been a benchmark for assessing the understanding capability of models, because when a model is actually computing well, the probability distribution of text is inherently grasping syntactical and semantical information about the language. So it's understanding the language. And also language models were involved in many tasks and applications. in automatic speech recognition, for instance, but also anytime we are using our smartphones or we are searching something on the web, there is somewhere a language model behind. Suggesting us which words, how to proceed what we are typing. But language modeling is now important and crucial because it's a task that allow deep models to learn very powerful, general, robust models that can be adapted then to any NLP task. So formally, let me W a sequence of words, or in general, any kind of token. A language model aim at estimating the probability distribution of those words. This joint probability is non-trivial to compute, but likely enough, we can decompose it in a factor of conditional probabilities where a word is conditioned on the word preceding it. So this conditional probability is easier to compute, and we can actually frame the problem of this estimation as a machine learning problem where we have as input the word preceding the current target word. And so the task becomes predicting which word follow a given context. Neural networks have been involved for estimating these conditional probabilities since probably 2003, where Benjo and others proposed a neural language model that is estimating this probability using a multi-layer perceptron. Due to the fixed size structure of MLP that process fixed input, the probability distribution was approximated and truncated with a fixed context. In this example, we chose a context of 2. So the prediction of a word exploit just, in this example, 2 words. And lately, the work of Mikolov and others introduced recurrent neural networks. Recurrent neural networks can directly estimate this conditional probability without any approximation. So the model is inherently better suited because also a recurrent neural network can deal with sequences of any length. And these models were the state of the art until a couple of years ago, maybe 3 now, when transformer started to outperforming recurrent neural networks in all the NLP tasks. Also, transformers can model this probability distribution directly, and they have been designed to overcome some of the limitation of recurrent neural networks that are basically the sequential computational cost and the fact that they cannot remember well very long-term dependencies. In this talk, I will actually present some models that are based on neural networks only, or recurrent neural networks only, but anyhow, the mechanism and the approach can be shifted with transformers seamlessly. To evaluate a language model, usually we exploit perplexity. Perplexity is a measurement that estimate how well a probability distribution fits a given corpus. So perplexity, denoted with WP, is a function of the corpus and the probability distribution. The lower the perplexity is, the better is the language model. How language modeling is important and related to language understanding? Well, so far we have not discussed one issue, which is the fact that the language modeling is a composition of symbols, whereas machine learning techniques and neural networks included deal with sub-symbolic inputs. So in order to learn to learn a machine learning model for language, we need to first understand how to convert the text into a sequence of symbols. And then we need to assign for each of these symbols a sub-symbolic representation. The process of segmenting the text into a sequence of symbols is called tokenization. There are multiple strategies. The most obvious and also very effective one is by subdividing the text into a sequence of words. Words are actually the components of language that convey the meaning in language like English or Italian or related ones. And so this is a good choice by design. And so if you look, for instance, at this example, if we have this simple sentence, we just split it into a sequence of 3 tokens. But we can also think to split the sequence into a sequence of characters. If we look at the example here, we can see that doing so, we create a much more longer sequence. But there are cases in which this is necessary, because if we just consider words as basic symbols, we are losing some morphological information about the structure of the word itself, and this may be for some tasks relevant. Therefore, one could also choose this at the cost of having longer sequences and breaking down the semantics of a word into multiple tokens. There are also trade-off strategies. Byte pair encoding, word peas, and sentence peas are statistical methods that can that establish a set of symbols so that very frequent words are not split, so are kept entire, but more rare words or very long words can be split in multiple tokens. These solutions are somewhat a trade-off between word level tokenization and character level, and they are becoming a very popular choices. Syllables tokenization is instead less popular, much less popular, but there are applications, and we will see Eduardo already give some spoil about that. We will see that we can exploit it for poetry. Once we have decided which is our set of symbols that we denote it with V, that stands for vocabulary, we need to define an assignment function that assign for each of these symbols a unique representation into a dense space. And this is called the embedding. This function is basically an can be implemented as an embedding matrix, where there are as many rows as how many are the symbols, and as the number of columns. And deciding how to do this mapping is non-trivial, because if we just let it to the randomness, so we just decide to create a random assignment, if you look at the example, we can end up in a bad assignment, because we are in a RD space that has a metric, a topology, and so we may put words that are not related to each other close, and words that instead should be together that are kept apart, making the learning model struggle. And that's here that language modeling or related language modeling tasks that come into play, because they can allow without supervision, because the task of language modeling that we have seen before is basically self-supervised, can make these representations to be more meaningful. Doing so, if you look at the example, we may end up in having a related concept closing this space, easing the generalization capabilities of the model that consequently will be better. One very popular technique for learning these representations of words is called continuous bag of words. There are actually two dual versions. There is also skipgram, but I will just discuss about continuous bag of words that basically learn this representation of words with a very shallow network that sum up the where the task is to predict a word given its context. In this case, the context involve both the word preceding the context, the word itself, and the word following the current word. This is guided by the idea that a word appear in context where there are related concepts. And so related word will end up in having similar representation. And this method has been actually very popular, and there are tons of variation of this method that allow to learn this embedding representation that can be then exploited by other learning models for specific tasks. But this approach is very effective, but there are a couple of limitations. Well, we are talking about word embeddings, and as I already partially anticipated, when we work at word level, we miss some information related to characters. And this may be important for some specific cases, but is also important to deal with for dealing with never seen words that perhaps may be very similar to others that instead are known. But also word embeddings give one representation per word, so one embedding for each symbol, but there are symbols that actually are multisensical. There are many examples of words that, depending on the context in which they appear, they actually have a different meaning. And this meaning could actually be very different. For instance, the word bank in the context of rivers is something. In the context of financial and money, is mean something else. So they cannot give what are called the contextual representations. And there are plenty of alternative solutions that try to cover up for one or both of these problems. Current state of the art, like BERT models, are kind of addressing both. Today, I will talk about a model that we proposed a couple of years ago that try to address both with a neural language model that is based on characters. And this model can be exploited to both learn word and context representation with an approach that actually has followed the principle of continuous bag of words that we have seen before. So first of all, tokenization. The text is tokenized in a sequence of words, but each word is further split in a sequence of characters. The task is the one of CBAU, so for each word, we have to predict it given the word in the surrounding context. Instead of having a simple shallow architecture, we are using LSTMs to encode this. We start from characters. So at the beginning, we have a bidirectional LSTM that is a kind of a recurrent neural network to map the sequence of characters in a representation of word. So we are calculating a word embedding, but without having a large vocabulary, a large embedding matrix, because we compute it through characters. And then we exploit those characters, stacking another bidirectional neural network to obtain, this time, a representation of the context. The bidirectional neural network is fed with the word embeddings computing before, and the task is to predict the word missing. Once we have trained this model, we can keep the encoder and use it as a feature extractor. These features can be computed either word or both context embeddings, and we can combine the features obtained by the encoder with external features and use them as input for any kind of NLP task. In particular, we carry out a couple of experiments on chunking and word sense disambiguation. Our model was trained on a dataset containing 2 billion words. And then we assess the quality of the feature obtained first in chunking in the CoinNL 2000 benchmark. We show first that using both the features of words embedding and context embedding helps the classifier on top of those features to reach the very good performances. Moreover, we compare the results with the state of the art, and we can see that the results are comparable. We are below the best results here, but our classifier is a very simple one, whereas both the state of the art involve CRF and post features. So if we try to add our features, post features to our input, and we remove instead the post features in the state of the art competitor, we are actually equaling the performances, which is, however, the advantage of our model. Our model is based on characters, which make it lighter because it has not the embedding matrix, so it's a smaller model with less parameters, and it's also, in general, a bit more robust to generalization for generalizing to unseen words, unseen or very rare words. In the same way, we carried out the evaluation on word sense disambiguation. In this case, we compare it with a standard approach that is EMS on a standard benchmark that is actually a collection of multiple benchmarks. This EMS is a SVM classifier with some handcrafted features for this task. If we use the EMS solely, we get lower performances with respect to using EMS with our context embeddings. Our model also generally outperform EMS with word-to-vec features. It's a bit instead it's underperforming context-to-vec. That is a related approach that is based on words, so it has much more parameters, and so it's a bit better. But if we try to compare the features of context-to-vec with towers in a context of random random noise at character level. We can see that the increase of noise is much more effective in decreasing the performances of the model based on context-to-vec, whereas our that is based on characters is more robust, so the decreasing of performances drop down slower, eventually outperforming the context-to-vec model. We now talk about the language modeling in the context of natural language generation. Language modeling is actually is not only very related with text generation, it's actually natural language generation is actually can be formulated as a special instance of language modeling. Indeed, if we split the WU sequence of words conveniently into sequences, one is X and one is Y, where X are the tokens that are already given to us, and we want to generate instead Y only tokens, we can reframe the language modeling as follows. So we have language generation can be formulated as the probability of generating the sequence Y given a sequence X. This convenient formulation that can be decomposed as in the case of language modeling is helpful because we can basically fit in this formulation all the natural language generation tasks that are usually sequence-to-sequence problems, where there is an input sequence that is given and the goal is to generate an output sequence. For instance, in machine translation, we have the source language, that is the text that we want to translate, that is given, and we need to translate where the target is the translation of this. We can group roughly all the problems of natural language generation in two. We can we refer to non-open-ended problems for the task in which the generation is strongly biased by the input sequence X. And this is the case of machine translation, for instance, where the generation totally depend on what on the sentence in input. Or also in summarization, if we have an article and we need to summarize it, all the content that we need is contained in the input text. So there is not much room for creativity in the sense that we do not need to invent new facts, new events. The task is very conditioned on what is given in input. In the case of open-ended generation, instead, we are dealing with processes of generation that are more free. For instance, in text continuation, we are given an input sequence of text or text passage, and we want to proceed continuing the story. But this is clearly has more outcome possible. So we can continue a story in many ways. There is no strong biasing from the input. Okay, and the same is for point generation. If we are given a third set as input and we want to generate the next third set, we can think of many possible ways to continue this poem. So these two problems are, I spoke about open and non-open-ended because these two problems are trained in the same way. So they are trained as language models. But the main difference is that inference time, they require completely different decoding strategies. There are two decoding strategies. The first one is based on likelihood maximization. So the probability that distribution that is learned by our model that is conditioned on the input text and the words generated so far can be, I mean, with this approach, the goal is to find the best sequence exploiting the trained model. But the number of possible sequences is exponentially large. There are many possible, as long as the sequence grow, there are many possible, exponentially many possible sequences. So finding the best one is intractable. Therefore, we rely on heuristics and search methods. The most common approaches are bin search and greedy search. In the case of greedy search, that is the simplest one, at each time step, we choose the best, the most probable token. And we proceed at the next step doing the same. So we do not explore at all. We just exploit the heuristic that the most probable token will be also the best one. And this is suboptimal, of course. And also bin search does not guarantee to find the optimum, but instead of exploring just one path, depending on the width of the search, it explores the best B paths. And this may lead to better results with respect to greedy search at the cost of heavier computation. And this kind of approach perform really well in non-open-ended problems, like machine translation, for instance. But if we try to apply them for point generation or any kind of open-ended task, generation task, the performance will be very poor. And this is kind of also an intuitive result, but that's the fact that if you use likelihood maximization when there is no strong biasing on the input, you will end up in very repetitive results. So other strategies have been devised in the case and are all based on sampling. Sampling also produce stochastic results. Therefore, the generation can vary also with the same input X. Whereas in the previous case, the outcome is deterministic once you have decided the method. The simplest sampling procedure is multinomial sampling. So at each time step, a word is picked according to its probability. So most probable tokens will have more chances to be selected, whereas elements from the tail that are very unlikely have a very little probability to be chosen. This is already a good way to produce better results for this kind of problems, but still the possibility to sample from the tail, where probably you get very unrelated tokens, is still high. Therefore, there are some tricks for instance, by crisping this distribution a bit when before doing sampling. Or there are other strategies like top K that decide to truncate the sampling and exploit only the most probable K elements for doing sampling, avoiding to sample from unlikely tokens. And top K use a fixed size truncation, but this may be non-optimal because sometimes you need more diversity, sometimes the results are crisp, so you may need less tokens from where to sample. So top P or nucleus sampling, also known as nucleus sampling, you may you can vary the size of the selected tokens by computing the cumulative mass probability of the tokens so that it reaches a certain threshold. So in this example, for instance, the token is chosen among the first, I guess it's 13 elements that overall has a probability of being chosen of 0.9. And these methods are really important for having very good results in language generation. So we will see now the case of neural poetry. That is an instance of, I mean, point generation. Point generation is an instance of natural language generation. And this is particularly fascinating task because in poetry, you have unique features like rhyming scheme, meter, there is a style, that is different from the normal text. Moreover, the problem is particularly difficult because usually you don't have as many resources of available data as you have in any other problem. In particular, if you're dealing with ancient poetry, where the resources available are much scarcer. In this scenario, we propose a model that is based on syllables and that allow a strong transfer learning from non-poetic data. Moreover, we basically exploit the model to generate tercets, and we devise also a selection mechanism that can identify only those tercets that are very coherent with author-specific or point type specific characteristics. So the model is again a language model based on syllables. So before training the language model, an hyphenation module has to tokenize the text in syllables. Then the task becomes just a language modeling problem, and it can be trained as usual. Why? Since we have few resources and we want to avoid, and we want to improve the model, we devised this multi-stage transfer learning strategy that consists of a series of multiple training steps so that the model can grasp a lot of knowledge related to syntax, grammar, and also the author style, also using non-poetic data. Syllables are important in this process because we are, especially when we are dealing with ancient poetry, we do have a language that has not much resources, even counting all the resources. Oh, sorry. So I was saying syllables are important because at syllable level, there are not many differences between the poetic data and non-poetic data. Moreover, we can also exploit the modern language and not only ancient resources, allowing us to make use of much more available data. And syllables are better than characters in this instance because in poetry, syllables are an essential component to determine metric, meter, and so on. Once our model has been trained in this multi-stage approach, we can exploit it to generate new points. And the generation consists of a sampling procedure. We repeat this procedure multiple times to collect a lot of samples. And then we explore the selection mechanism that is based on a score. This score is actually an average of multiple different functions that aim at scoring the structure, the meter, the rhyme, and also the lexicon of the generated tercets. The better is the score, the more the model, the generation is compliant to the characteristic of the author and the kind of poetry that we are want to generate. And so we can rank them and choose the best case solutions. We evaluate and assess this framework in the scope of Italian poetry. We focus on Dante Alighieri, that is probably the most important Italian poet. And we exploit modern data, Italian data, from a large corpus that is Paisa. Then we also use the production of Dante that are also that involve some poetry but also prose. And then as a final training data, we exploit the Divine Comedy. It's a major work. And we evaluate, first, we evaluate the multi-stage transfer learning strategy. And then we also ask a human, expert and non-expert to evaluate the generations. In the case of multi-stage transfer learning, so we can see here, we have different kind of training approaches. In the first row, we have just a training on the Divine Comedy, and we get some results. Then we can see that the arrow indicate the fact that first we train on one data set and then we fine-tune the model on the other one. And we can see how doing this procedure of training first on Italian data, then on Dante production, and then on the Divine Comedy only, improves the perplexity of the model quite significantly with respect to training just on the few data that we have on Divine Comedy. Then we use the generated tercets for the evaluation of humans. We first considered non-expert judges and ask them to, given a certain tercet, to decide whether this tercet was real or not. And the author, the judges do not know if the how many are the relevant real presented tercet and how many are not. And from the results, we can see that our model is considered real almost half of the time as the real tercet produced by the poetry, by the poet. And also, let's consider that these non-expert judges are not so unexpert, because the people we pooled are people from humanistic background that are studying literature, so they have a well-known knowledge about Dante Alighieri. But of course, they are not expert in the field as the judges that we exploited instead in this second evaluation. Here we ask for experts in Dante Alighieri to judge the generation. Oh, I'm quite late. Okay, I'll speed up. So basically, the outcome of the expert judges seems to promote the fact that our model is capable of generating good quality rhymes, but it lacks a bit about meter and also emotional capabilities with respect to the performances of the poet. So here we show a few generations The first three were well rated by the non-expert judges. The fourth one was instead considered not good by most of them. Unfortunately, I guess most of you don't speak Italian, so and even less speak Dante Alighieri vulgar language. So I'll go forward and discuss finally about very briefly because I have a few time about.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but
tell me.
We only have 15 minutes left. That's
okay.
usually the questions and answers.
But
I mean, it's really. Are you sure? Because then we can maybe cut back on questions, and then you could have like say another 5 minutes.
Yes, we can cut it here to ask for questions, and then if we have time, I will go on this different topic.
Okay.
Sorry for the delay.
No. Thank you. So thank you so much for this very interesting discussion, and some of the results are very impressive, of course. So if you don't mind, then the floor is open for questions. So I guess yes. So I guess as a host, maybe I could ask the first question if that's okay.
Sure.
So how does your model resolve this ambiguity? This I think it's semantic ambiguity or syntactic ambiguity when one word maps to entirely different semantics, such as bank.
Okay, this is related to the first model here. Okay. How can it grasp you mean how can okay, I get the question. Well, basically our model here compute the context of a word. So if here we have the sentence, I don't know, the bank is on the river. The word bank, which is the ambiguous one, is surrounded by a context that is related to rivers and stuff like this. So processing the sentence, excluding the word bank, that actually is also useless to disambiguate itself, we end up with a representation of its context. And our model while learning in an unsupervised way, automatically learn to disentangle the context related to the river with respect to the context related to the bank for the financial institution. Okay, so the representation depends on the context, not on the word itself. That's why our model can disambiguate it.
Okay, and so this context embedding will be different for bank and the river bank and financial.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that the expression for that, would that be a vector like embedding of a token or a matrix?
It will be still a vector.
Still a vector.
Still a vector.
Okay.
You would have two different vectors, but still vectors.
Okay. Great. That's very interesting. So people are welcome to go forward with their questions.
I had a quick question. First of all, thank you so much. It was a really good presentation. So you talked about syllables, and I think that's a really good way to address the point of like rhythm and meter. You talked about style, so we can capture, for example, Dante's work. One thing I was curious about is there something that you've already worked on or looking to work on, but how to capture the narrative that is at the core of a particular poem? Or, I mean, I believe even the Divine Comedy is a narrative, and that is either to convey a particular experience. So I was just curious about your view on that.
Okay, well, our model is trained on tercets. So in a single tercet, there is some narrative as well, but of course is the entire poem that has a micro narrative. So this model cannot capture this kind of narratives, also because we generate tercet from scratch. We are not biasing the generation with the poem. Okay, so we are not giving to, when it generates, we are not giving to the model also previous tercets. So the narrative here is not well captured. In order to do so, one step is first to use as well. If we look again here, so we should first have a sequence in input given X that contains some previous tercets, for instance. So you already are giving text that contains some narrative. Mm-hmm. And that's a way of biasing the model. Of course, we are still dealing with a problem that has few data. So it may struggle in this kind of high-level semantic stuff. To cope with this, one could think probably to capture it by not focusing only on a single poet, but on the entire genre. Sorry, and so what you could have much more data and try to grasp from more data. I don't know, all the Italian poets or all the English poets. Maybe better to capture it.
Okay. And you mentioned also at one point that one of the issues in the decoding portion is that of repetition. So were you able to address that in your model?
You mean
like the outcome of the poem, you know, there's a lot of repetition when generating poetry. So were you able to address that?
I mean, in general, there is a lot of repetitions when you do natural language generation, exploiting likelihood maximization strategies of decoding in open-ended problems like poem generation. We can avoid using sampling methods. This inherently avoid because sampling has stochastic behavior, so we escape the traps that we instead would have using likelihood maximization. So we don't have a lot of repetitions in our model. We exploited only multinomial sampling, but actually top P and top K are much better. But at that time, we didn't have those two methods. There was just multinomial.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I have one more question. So regarding the embeddings, so like Alex was saying, at one point you'll have multiple the same word, but in different contexts, so you have different embeddings. How would this work with the metaphors? So in order to add more like variety to the poetry, does the embedding space capture the metaphor? So let's say if you're training it on poetry, will, let's say, I don't know, a box be closer to the heart, let's say, so such that to capture the feeling that you can add things to it? So it's quite a vague question, but do you have an idea how could an embedding capture also the properties of certain words such that it would allow for more variety in the language?
Okay, that's a tough question. I'd say that metaphor it's quite a high level concept. We can understand it, but if we ask a kid to understand the metaphor, maybe he is not capable of doing so. So it's not a simple metaphor, are not simples, and the embeddings may capture it if I guess if there are many data available, but that's well, that's not easy. I guess that's not easy for the model. And in general, I would not expect a model to capture metaphor at an embedding level. So at a low level, I will actually, I actually believe that this is may something that can emerge later on during processing a sentence or a piece of poetry.
But I think like the emergence, like that would be a bit more guided by the style of the author. So if the author has used certain types of metaphors, then that will emerge later. But like I know that a lot of people who write poetry usually try to have like a dictionary by themselves to see whether a certain word can have a different meaning, and they actually search for different words or different synonyms. And do you think like having such another like corpus of text, a non-poetry corpus of text, such as a dictionary with different meanings, could maybe create better mappings like that and therefore enhance the style of the text? That's something what I was thinking, because then it's true, it's a bit more guided, but it would bring more meaning to the words rather than only what the authors are giving there.
We do exploit, and also, I mean, our model is based on syllables, and syllables are obtained from the Divine Comedy. So we set the dictionary of symbols from the Divine Comedy. And we do not have actually words because we are based on syllables. I don't know if I got it right, but so it is not simple to convert, let's say, with some method, a word with some synonyms, because we also not have words. I'd say that we exploit also non-poetic data as pre-training, and if there is, I mean, if there is some information over there, the model can capture it. But yeah, I would not. I don't know how to do something like that, and it's also not very language. I mean, end to end is not end to end, you know.
Yeah, no, it's not a question that has necessarily an answer, because it's something that I'm more interested in,
Okay.
on how you would represent a metaphor, for example, and I was curious on your thoughts on that.
Okay. I'd say, well, in few words, I'd say that that's tricky. I don't have an answer to, but I think that if you want to represent a metaphor, it's not something at word level, it's more something that emerges at sentence level or higher level.
Yeah. Okay.
Do we have time for one more question? Yes. Sorry, go on.
Thank you for your presentation first. And I wanted to ask if we don't have test set to start with at the time of inference, we don't have any and few words to start with, and we are just generating something from scratch. Then is there any way to explicitly control or constrain the model for some style or for some category? For example, I want to generate poetry for a specific poet of specific type on a specific topic, kind of semi-supervision. Is there any way to do it explicitly in terms of model, not through the biasing of the data?
Okay. Yes. Thank you for the question. Well, if you can bias the generation if you have some kind of model. I'm sorry, if you have some kind of data set that has some features attached to the poets, to the poetries. So you may know that a poem is related to a certain author, related to a certain style, is a certain kind of I don't know, emotional topic and stuff like this. So you can use this kind of features in training and give them as input to bias the generation, and eventually exploit them also in inference time.
Okay, so we need to provide some context at the time of training, separate than this natural language processing text itself. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there is at training time it's needed something like that.
Okay. Thank you for your answer.
You're welcome.